Something happens to you. A piece of music reaches a part of you that language cannot. A film ends in a way you did not expect. Someone says something that opens a door in your chest you did not know was there. Or nothing happens at all, just an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, a thought that drifts in from nowhere, and suddenly, without warning, your eyes fill with tears. You are doing something that no other animal on Earth does. Elephants grieve. Chimpanzees show distress. Gorillas form deep social bonds and mourn their dead. But none of them, not the great apes who share 98% of our DNA, not the dolphins who demonstrate self-awareness, not the dogs who have lived alongside humans for 15,000 years, none of them produce tears in response to emotional states. They produce tears to lubricate the eyes, just as we do. But the emotional cry, tears that fall because something is felt rather than because the eye needs moisture, appears to be, in all the current evidence, exclusively human. This fact is strange enough that it has attracted serious scientific attention. And the explanation, when you piece it together from evolutionary biology, neuroscience, and social psychology, turns out to reveal something fundamental about what humans are and what we need from each other. Let's start with the basic question: what are emotional tears, chemically? Biochemist William Frey spent years studying the composition of emotional tears versus reflex tears, the kind produced when you chop an onion or when something gets in your eye. His finding was striking. Emotional tears contain significantly higher concentrations of several proteins, including leucine and enkephalin, a natural painkiller, and prolactin, the hormone associated with stress responses. They also contain higher levels of adrenocorticotropic hormone, a key marker of physiological stress. In other words, emotional tears are not simply the eye's overflow mechanism. They appear to be carrying something out of the body. They are, in a chemical sense, a stress release mechanism, expelling hormones and proteins associated with emotional and physiological distress. This is why people consistently report feeling better after crying. Not simply because the emotional situation has resolved, but because the crying itself appears to facilitate a measurable physiological shift. Research by Jonathan Rottenberg and colleagues found that the emotional relief associated with crying is not immediate, it takes time to develop, but that it is real and measurable. The body is doing something functional with the act of weeping. But this only explains part of the picture. Because crying is not just a private act. It is an intensely social one. And this is where the evolutionary story gets interesting. Psychologist Ad Vingerhoets at Tilburg University has spent decades studying the psychology of crying and argues that the key to understanding emotional tears lies in their social function. A crying face, in humans, is one of the most powerful social signals in our repertoire. It triggers specific, automatic responses in observers, the impulse to approach, to offer comfort, to reduce the threat that produced the tears. It communicates vulnerability in a way that disarms aggression. You cannot see someone cry without being pulled, however slightly, toward them. This social function may explain why emotional crying evolved in humans specifically. We are, among primates, the most intensely social species on Earth, the most dependent on cooperation, the most capable of complex social coordination, the most vulnerable to the consequences of social rupture. A signal that reliably elicits care and comfort from others would have had enormous survival value in the context of early human groups. It would have functioned as a high-stakes social alarm, a way of broadcasting distress in a form that others are biologically primed to respond to. And the signal is difficult to fake. This is crucial. Tears are not easily produced voluntarily. The physiology of crying involves the parasympathetic nervous system, the same system that governs rest, digestion, and social bonding, and it cannot be reliably activated by will alone. This involuntary quality makes tears an honest signal in the biological sense, a costly, hard-to-fake advertisement of genuine emotional state. In an evolutionary context where the ability to read others' emotional states accurately was critical to survival, a signal this difficult to counterfeit would have carried extraordinary weight. But there is another layer to this story. Research by Michael Trimble and others has identified something specific about the kinds of experiences that produce human tears, and it is not simply pain or fear. The situations most reliably associated with emotional crying are not purely negative. They include the reunion of loved ones, the experience of transcendent beauty, the witnessing of profound human courage or sacrifice, the sudden recognition of deep connection or love. Crying happens at weddings. At the end of long journeys. At the moment someone achieves something they have been working toward for years. At music that somehow captures something true about the human condition. This pattern suggests something important. The trigger for human tears is not simply distress, it is the experience of something that feels deeply meaningful. Something that exceeds ordinary experience. Something that touches what the philosopher Immanuel Kant called the sublime, the experience of encountering something that your ordinary categories cannot fully contain. Neuroscientist Antonio Damasio has suggested that these tears of meaning, the ones produced not by pain but by beauty, transcendence, or profound connection, are linked to the brain's processing of the relationship between what is and what could be. The film that makes you cry is the film that briefly opens a window onto a version of human experience that feels truer or deeper or more meaningful than everyday life. The piece of music that makes you cry is the one that somehow expresses something your interior life has been carrying without words. The tears are the body's response to the mind briefly touching something it recognizes as important. And this is what is most human about crying. It is not simply the release of distress. It is the body's response to meaning. It is what happens when something matters so much, or is so beautiful, or so true, that the ordinary channels of expression are not sufficient to hold it. Other animals experience pain. They experience fear. They experience something that looks very much like grief. But the specific experience of being moved, of having something so deeply registered that the eye itself begins to speak, appears to require a mind capable of the kind of narrative complexity, the kind of meaning-making, the kind of projection into larger frames of significance that only humans have developed. You cry because you are a creature who can understand that things matter. Who can hold the weight of another person's experience as if it were your own. Who can feel the distance between what is and what could be, between what was lost and what might still be found. No other animal carries that weight. And no other animal cries.